things would I do differently if I were engaging in a multiplicative disciple-making process, often referred to as DMM, right now? I think there are probably four things that come to mind quickly. First is I would find a coach and a community. It's a difficult task to push a ball up the hill all the time. And having a coach, having someone who can encourage you, tell you to keep going, someone who's seen the path before you and gone there is valuable in that process. So connecting with someone who will ask you the right questions, someone who will understand your context and be able to commiserate with you when you're struggling, and also be able to encourage you in that process, celebrate your wins, and help you achieve sort of, or at least write down and focus on achievable next steps in the process of implementing a DMM strategy. Second thing I wish I knew was that it's a lot like reconstruction or remodeling. I live in a 115-year-old house, and we've remodeled it significantly, and so every time we go to remodel, we're tearing out something, and we have to tear it out completely before we can build on and be confident that what we're building on is going to be able to withstand time. And so it's the same way in helping people come to understand, even myself, that I have a whole set of values, deeply held motives that oftentimes aren't informed by the biblical text. They're informed by the Christian cultural traditions which I've grown up in. And when I honestly go back to the Bible and begin to look at it, I begin to see that it's radically different, or it's not exactly the way I thought it was. And so in trying to get that from myself to other people, I realized that I made a huge mistake in taking a new strategy, thinking that disciple-making movements was just a discovery Bible study, and just taking this discovery Bible study and planting it in people who had old ideas. And so it was very difficult for them to understand the value of discovery. It was very difficult for them to understand the primacy of obedience. And so they would oftentimes struggle in learning to facilitate a discovery group well, because they believed that knowledge was more important than obedience. And they would answer questions rather than let someone discover those questions for themselves in the text, and then it coached them to identify how they could in fact live out an I will statement that comes from that passage. Obviously, that which you discover yourself, you have more ownership in. And so getting that value across was really difficult. So the reconstruct or the deconstruction process was a lot longer than I thought. In fact, I often describe it as like pushing a boulder up a hill. There's never a moment in which you can relax or rest, because the moment you do, the gravity of modern cultural Christianity is going to drag you back. And so you constantly have to exert effort to maintain those mindsets of a new model that you're putting in. So the deconstruction process took a lot longer than I thought, and I wish I'd known that, so I would have had the patience to stay in the deconstruction process and helping people reframe their understanding of what gospeling looks like, coming from Jesus and coming from the four Gospels. So I would be more patient. I would take more time. I would just realize that it takes a lot more discussion. It takes a lot more interaction with people and engagement with folks who are trying to figure out where to go and what to do and how to do it. So that's why finding a coach and finding a community are vitally important. I mean, a coach is great, single person, that can really help you ask the right questions, but a community is vital too. And I had to find that community in a digital way first. I had to find people across the country who I could gather with on a regular basis and just commiserate, just share my frustrations, understand that there were other people having the same problems and struggles that I was having, and other people that were as crazy as I was to think that a movement, that the gospel in an exponential way could break forth in the area or out of the local fellowship that I was involved in. So, finding a coach, finding a community was really, really important. And I wish I would have known also that the disciple-making movement strategy is a simple process, but it's not easy. There's a saying that comes from Oliver Wendell Holmes, a Supreme Court Justice in the United States. He says that I wouldn't give a plug nickel or a fig, I think he says, for simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my life savings for simplicity on the other side of complexity. And that's what disciple-making movements really is it's taken some very complex theological, sociological, biblical concepts and boiling them down into their simplicity. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's not easy for several different reasons. One, which I've mentioned, that the fact that your culture, your biblical culture, and for those of us, I live in the United States, so it's a very church culture. And those church genes don't eradicate easily. Gene splicing, even in a theological, biblical, spiritual world, is radically difficult. And so the fact that we're trying to call people to a simple strategy doesn't mean that it's easy. It's a misnomer or a misconception. And a lot of that created frustration inside me when I didn't have that presumption going forward. And so, for instance, in the deconstruction phase, I thought it was simple. I overused the word simple, and people heard that, and they didn't really appreciate the deconstruction phase, because if it was so simple, then why do you need to spend so much time deconstructing? And so I realized I just used the word simple too much, and I needed to grasp the concept. And I remember when it was first said to me, it's simple but not easy, it was like, boom, lights went on. And I realized that simple is not always easy. It's easy to say, for instance, it's easy to stop smoking. It's easy to change your eating habits, your diet. It's easy to lose weight. Is it? No, it's not. I mean, it's simple truths. It's really simple. But it's really hard to make small changes. So the same thing's true in the world of disciple making. When you're moving from discipleship to disciple making, you're making a radical change in mindset. And if you don't continue to press on those mindsets, it becomes vitally difficult. But it's worth it. When you see that movement, when you see someone come to faith through just reading the Bible and pledge allegiance to Jesus, when you see that first generation of disciple making take place, and you see that second generation take place, it's worth all of the hard work. It's worth all that it takes to get there and to make it happen. Because I believe that that's what Jesus called us to in the Great Commission. He called us to making disciples who make disciples, not just to make a disciple. I mean, I've made a lot of disciples in my life, but could those disciples always make disciples? That wasn't true until I adopted a disciple-making movement strategy and understood that multiplicative disciple-making was what Jesus called us to. And I've loved every minute of it, as hard as it's been, as difficult as it's been, as frustrating as it's been, as discouraged as I've gotten. It's been rewarding. And if you stay at it, I believe God will give you the opportunity to see your dreams come